Dear friend, I have the pleasure to welcome today for the first podcast of the WAPPP Airport chapter, Mr. Tiago Pereira Sousa, who is the Executive Director of the Agency for National Aviation in Brazil. He will be the first one, and I'm very pleased to welcome him. The reason why we've chosen to start with Brazil is because Brazil has been very active in the last year about airport privatization. And the question will be around the topic of airport privatization in Brazil. Mr. Pereira Sousa, let me first start with the question about the situation around the pandemic. You know, although it has been a turbulent time due to the pandemic, the Brazilian government has announced a new round of privatization of Brazilian airports. Can you tell us more?
Hello, good morning, Jacques, or afternoon for you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about Brazilian airport concessions. The seventh round is a reality. 3 clusters, 26 airports, which corresponds with around 20% of all Brazilian passengers. The predicted amount of investments is more than $1 billion in the 30 years of concession agreements. Congonhas and Santos Dumont's clusters are our crown jewels. These airports are located in the downtown of the 2 most important cities of Brazil, São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Around 20 million people live in these cities. By the way, Jacques, before the pandemic, Congonhas-Santos Dumont route was one of the biggest air bridges in the world. So I could say that whatever occurs in Brazilian aviation, the demand for these 2 airports are very strong and resilient. The big challenge there is their site limitations. For these reasons, Congonhas and Santos Dumont must attract the big airports players in Brazil and worldwide. For other profile of investors, especially for those who focus on regional hubs and sustainable operations, we have the North Cluster with Belém and Macapá in the middle of Amazon area. Before the pandemic, these airports together had more than 2 million passengers. I'd like to remember that these airports serve towns where the access is very scarce. Some ones can only be accessed by boats, for example. So I believe that this cluster has a huge potential to develop a sustainable regional aviation, promoting businesses and investments in that area, Jacques.
Wow, thank you, Tiago. What are the steps and the dates announced for these new transactions?
In late December, we approved the feasibility studies, bid the auction notice, and concession agreements, and submitted them all to the Brazilian Account Court, TCU. The approval time is predicted to 3 months, around 3 months. As the model is well known and recognized by the court, I think we must not have problems or new recommendations there. So probably, Jacques, until March, we will be publishing the documents and launching the official bid process. Given the 3 months between launching and the bid auction, this last should occur in the end of June, beginning of July. To sum up, March is the month of the opening the official process, and June, July, when the bid auction happens. It's important to bear in mind these dates, Jacques.
Okay, thank you. Very aggressive schedule for the project. What will be the main innovations in the structuring and format of the transaction?
The model is almost the same we've adopted since the 5th round. After several technical discussions with investors and airlines, our few innovations for this round have come to address some peculiarities of Congonhas and Santos Dumont. I already said those airports have very limited sites because they are in the downtown of big cities. The future interventions must be then implemented very carefully with high coordination with all the airlines in order to avoid disturbances and in the operations. So we decided to give more time to the initial investment in both airports from 3 to 5 years. This is the first innovation. The other innovation is also related to these limitations. We believe, and the feasibility studies predicted, that both airports can have their capacity increased. For example, nowadays Congonhas operates 33 movements per hour, and we estimate that it can reach 44 in the future. But this depends on several measures, both operational and infrastructure, including the interaction with airlines, public authorities, air navigation authority, local authorities because of traffic. So it's a possibility of upside, this increasing, and the concessionaire will have a lot of space to increase the capacity in the airport. However, the reality in the future won't meet the initial prognosis. The concessionaire cannot claim to rebalance the concession agreement. This is we are leaving it very clear in the contract, and we believe this innovation is it is very important to make the rules of the game very clear for everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question. We've seen that your previous transaction have been very successful. A lot of candidates have been bidding, and the last one, which was in 2021, have been very successful. What do you see as the reasons for this success?
Jacques, I think it's a set of several factors. Firstly, I think Brazilian aviation has a huge potential because the country is very, very big, the demand is very high, and the competition with other transportation models is low. We only have particularly roadways. So it's a very important issue. The other one, we've never denied the facts of the first concession rounds of airports. On the contrary, we tried to learn from each round. We've changed the concession fees model, with payments up front, no fee in the 5 first years. We changed the regulation, the tariff regulation, the investment regulation, making them more flexible and reasonable for the airport operator and for the airlines. Apart from this, through the history of concession contracts management, I think we have been able to show the rule of law in the Brazilian airport sector. 10 years ago, for example, frequently we had for some foreign investors complaints that in Brazil, it's always the same players who win the infrastructure auctions with unfeasible bids, expecting then further renegotiations. This may have been reflected in the first problematic concessions, but the way the Brazilian government acted in the management of the concession agreements ended up, in my opinion, attracting new groups, international ones, sometimes even not join with national bidders. So, Jacques, the potential of the Brazilian aviation, the good modeling, and the rule of law are, in my point of view, the main reasons for the success you mentioned.
Thank you, Tiago. I have a last question, which is the question everybody is asking in this moment. Like most of the airport concessionaires in the world, Brazilian airport concessionaires have experienced difficulties in getting through the COVID crisis. What are the actions that have been taken in the short and medium term by the Brazilian government to maintain the financial health and viability of Brazilian airport concessions? It's a tricky question, but I know that you've been successful.
There are many there are many actions since the beginning of the pandemic, not only related to airports, but also to the airlines. The initial governmental guideline was we keep all the logistic corridors opened in order to be able to combat the pandemic. This was the goal. For that, we implemented several regulatory waivers in the aerial sector, both for airlines and airports concessionaires. Talking more specifically about the airports, beyond the waivers, we immediately postponed the concession fees payments and implemented the standstill in the financial loan payments. And then we followed with the contracts rebalancing. By the way, Jacques, I would like to link these rebalances with the rule of law I mentioned before. Airports were the first infrastructure sector in Brazil to implement contracts rebalance due to the pandemic. All this process amounted already around $500 million for 2020 and must reach a similar value for 2021. Now we are preparing to start the discussions with the concessionaires for the rebalances for the current year. In the end, it's important to say we are monitoring the different waves of the pandemic and adopting the necessary measures. For example, yesterday we adopted waiver slots for airlines because of the Omicron wave. Always, all these measures always in dialogue with all the stakeholders.
Well, thank you very much, Tiago. I think it's the meaning of partnership in PPP. I would like to thank you for this interview and the time you spent with us. And thank you to all the friends that have been listening to this podcast. Thank you.